A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus told his disciples a parable about the necessity for them to pray always without becoming weary. He said, "There was a judge in a certain town who neither feared God nor respected any human being. And a widow in that town used to come to him and say, 'Render me a just decision against my adversary.' For a long time, the judge was unwilling. But eventually he thought, 'While it is true that I neither fear God nor respect any human being, because this widow keeps bothering me, I shall deliver a just decision for her, lest she finally come and strike me.' The Lord said, 'Pay attention to what the dishonest judge says. Will not God then secure the rights of his chosen ones who call out to him day and night? Will he be slow to answer them? I tell you, he will see to it that justice is done for them speedily. But when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
On behalf of all the alumni of St. Pius X Preparatory Seminary and the guests, I especially take the opportunity to thank Monsignor Caldwell and the parish of Curia of Ars for opening their spiritual home to us this afternoon and welcoming us to join them at their regularly scheduled 4 p.m. Mass. Unlike the corrupt judge in today's parable, who had to be worn down and under fear of physical assault, finally relent to the poor widow's request, Monsignor Caldwell immediately welcomed the idea of us joining him. It is especially fitting that as alumni of a school that served to help high school students discern their vocations to priesthood and prepare for other ministries if they did not go on to the priesthood, it's particularly appropriate that we gather here in this parish, which is under the patronage of St. John Vianney, the Curia of Ars, the patron saint of Diocesan priests. On behalf of all of us, again, I thank you. In some ways, it's a blessing for me to be here. I was here as a pastoral year student back in the 1980s, and as I was reading out back, several people came up who were very much part of my journey towards priesthood, and so it's a blessing to me to be here today, especially in this church. For those of us who are gathered here today and have never heard of St. Pius, please allow me to briefly explain something about it. Not long after the Diocese of Rothwell-Center was founded in 1957, the first bishop of Rothwell-Center, Bishop Kellenberg, announced that he was going to open a minor seminary in this newly formed diocese named St. Pius X in order to prepare students for the priesthood. And this minor seminary would cover grades 9 to 12 and the first 2 years of college. And then after these 6 years, the young man, if he was to continue on his journey to priesthood, he would go to the major seminary in Huntington. As construction began at the site located on Front Street in Uniondale, the doors were opened at a pre-existing building on Greenwich Street in Hempstead to welcome seminarians as they waited for the building to be completed. And then by 1961, the building was complete, a beautiful building, and the students from grades 9 through the second year of college, began their studies. There were basically 2 or 3 classes in each of those high school grades and fewer students at the college level. The college classes were taken in a distinct part of the building, and some would contend that this area was the smallest college campus in the entire world. It didn't even have a bathroom. Nonetheless, the arrangement continued until 1968, when Cathedral College in Queens was completed, and the Rocky College seminarians did 4 years of college at Cathedral College. The faculty and staff at St. Pius X Prep Seminary focused their attention on the high school students who were welcomed into the school. And this continued until 1984, when it was decided to close St. Pius X. And now, as you look around you today and see some of my fellow alumni at Mass, it is undoubtedly difficult to believe, because of how young we look, that the youngest of us is at least 38 years out of high school. I dare say that almost all of us here, for all of us here, it's hard to believe. As I prepared for today's homily, reflected on today's reading, I couldn't help but be very mindful of how that building of St. Pius was constructed. In the center was this beautiful chapel that could easily accommodate the 350 students at daily Mass. To the right, as you face the chapel, was the cafeteria, gymnasium, auditorium. To the left were the classrooms and administrative offices. Each part of the building had a singular focus: mind, body, and spirit. And where was the spiritual part? It was in the center. For us as students, it was the place that you constantly passed by and looked through the chapel's glass facade as you crossed from gym or lunch to the classrooms. The importance of prayer in the structure of the building is an apt image of what our readings today tell us about prayer and its importance in our lives. We heard in our first reading from Exodus about a battle being waged by the Israelites against the Amalekites. They were on a journey and just escaped from Egypt onto the Promised Land. And the Amalekites, they're not too happy that their land is being invaded by God's people. And so a battle ensues. And as long as Moses raises his hands in that gesture of prayer, the Israelites are victorious. In the gospel parable, we hear the story of this powerless widow who secures a victory in getting a judge who neither fears God nor respects fellow humans to render a just decision. It's a parable, it's a story telling us of our need not to give up, regardless of what appears to be the odds of success, to be persistent in our prayer. In our contemporary culture, we make every effort not to be powerless, don't we? We have a need. We are more inclined to trust in our own strength and resources than we are to turn toward God in prayer. When we can't resolve a need on our own, then we tend to turn to those around us who have resources or influence. And sometimes it's only when we are brought to the limits of our own ability that we ever really cry out to God as we only hope. In reality, prayer often is the last recourse rather than our first recourse. And while the saying to work as if it all depended upon us and pray as if it all depended upon God is a worthwhile saying, our tendency is to forget about the land unless there are no other options. when in fact Jesus is telling us to make time for God in good times and in bad. In some ways, it all comes down to what the purpose of prayer is, isn't it? Certainly there's nothing wrong with going to God at times of trouble. When someone you love is in need. When we're faced with a seemingly impossible situation. When we have run out of all of our options. However, in Jesus telling us that we need to be persistent in prayer, Jesus is saying to us, calling us to see prayer as more than a lifeline in that old television show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? But rather, prayer is that way in which we're with God, and God is with us. And so, how is it, and what is it Jesus is calling us to see prayer as? I share with you as I conclude this homily something which my brother alumni know from the years at Pius. The motto of the school was Christi Simus non noster. Translated, we belong to Christ and not to ourselves. Or, let us be of Christ and not of ourselves. Prayer is that time in which we look to Christ. At Mass, we are fed his body. Through the Gospel, we hear his words and learn his actions. We ask him to shape us and guide us, to not only come to our rescue, but to help us to be shaped and formed into living the life as his disciple, perhaps as a priest or a deacon, as a mother or father, as a sister or brother, as an employer or employee. We ask ourselves in prayer to be open, so that like the Israelites in the first reading, we are victorious in those battles against worldly or selfish values. We open ourselves in prayer so that we might be faithful to the charge given to Timothy in today's second reading. To proclaim the word, whether convenient or inconvenient, in season or out of season. Mary, Mother of God, pray for us. St. John Vianney, pray for us. St. Pius X, pray for us. All holy men and women,